I wanted to know if you can explain a little bit more about kind of like how this played out, how these kind of first revolts turned into this revolution, and kind of how this happened, because it was the first successful kind of slave revolution.
Well, it was rooted really in the brutal reality of life as a slave, working on the plantations. We have to kind of think about this, because there were three distinct classes in Haitian society at that time. You had the big landowners, known as the big whites. You had the small whites, as they were called, and they were kind of the petty bourgeois of the society. And then you had the mulattoes, many of them the byproduct, actually, of sexual violence against enslaved Africans. They also owned land as well, but their rights, their citizenry was very truncated, in fact. So the early stages of the revolt took place around the question of democratic rights, took place on the question of the brutality of the big and small whites to control the enslaved Africans working on the massive plantations. Haiti, or the island of Hispaniola, was the most prosperous island in the world. It really was the anchor to the slave trade. And so when the rebellions began on the various plantations, this had a profound effect. This is also taking place as the French Revolution was also in process as well. And so you have the events on the island, you have the events in France, you have the emergence of leadership that come about, and certainly we all know the name of Toussaint Louverture, Dessalines, that would complete the revolution in 1804. And so the nature of the rising consciousness, the brutal reality that was taking place in Haitian society, led to the various rebellions taking place. And in fact, which we could probably talk about later, it would have a profound effect for the United States as well. Because the threat of rebellion, remember, what we understand is the United States is born in 1776. It's a new nation state, and it's a slave society. And so they're fearful of what could emerge in the sense of slave rebellions and the conspiracy of slave rebellions. So George Washington, Jefferson, and all the founding fathers were terrified of what could emerge in their own backyard, and Haiti being in the Western Hemisphere. We've got to keep in mind that this was part of a struggle among the ruling elite that represented the Britain, the Spaniards, the French, and this was a crucial element of who would control the markets of slavery, right? Who could control the island itself. And it was, the British, the Spaniards, and certainly the French tried to take the island a number of times. One of the crises that took place was the fact that there was no revolutionary leadership, actually, that would be able to certainly take inspiration from the French Revolution, which was also going through deep crisis, and a counter-revolution, where you would see the rise of Bonaparte in 1801, who will attempt to retake the island in 1802, 1803, 1804. And so there was no revolutionary leadership, no organization. Toussaint was a powerful figure in society. But we must keep in mind that Toussaint was, he definitely took the germ of French sensibility to heart. And he continued certain elements of the plantation system. He was in some ways a viceroy of Haitian society, ordained by the French. He did various different things to cut deals with the Spaniards at moments, with the British at moments. And so you didn't have the type of leadership that you would have in the Russian Revolution of 1917, led by the Bolsheviks, Lenin and Trotsky as its principal leaders. You didn't have that in Haitian society. You had basically a slave revolt, a slave rebellion, a slave revolution. And certainly they created one of the most important events in human history. But at the same time, the things that Eric is talking about, what he laid out concretely, is the fact that Toussaint Louverture had deeper faith in the French Revolution and the prospects of the French Revolution. And so it did not develop organization nor a multi-layered leadership that would in fact continue the revolutionary process. And what happens eventually is basically decades on decades of counter-revolution. and also the intra-class and interracial dynamics continue to play itself out, going up to the Valles, Papa Doc, Baby Doc, Moises, on and on and on. And so in some ways the germs of that is really rooted in the fact that the revolution was incomplete concretely.